what's happening right now is there is an immense change that is taking place. And I foresaw this years ago. I foresaw this back in 2016, early 2016, around, I want to say maybe late 2015, early 2016. I really began to foresee that the world was turning fascistic. People can say, well, Ted, the world was already fascist with George Bush. I mean, like, really fascist. I'm not talking about, like, I'm not talking about what internet warriors think is fascism, right? Like, you have these libertarian types online who are like, we're already living in fascism. Well, how do you know that? Well, there's police officers. If you have police officers, it's fascism. Right, of course. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about real fascism. Okay, we're talking like Nazism. That's what we're talking about. We are talking Nazism, a revival of Nazism. And it may not be like Schindler's List Nazism. By that I mean it may not look exactly like what Nazism was in the past, but I think it's going to be a revived form of Nazism with a different look. And the thing is that, and let me just say that we've been seeing signs of this for years. Back in 2017, I wrote about the rise of Geert Wilders. Early 2016, I talked about the rise of the far right in Europe, how Europe is turning Nazistic. And what acted as a catalyst towards all of this, and I've said this a million times, was the refugee crisis. And I believe that the refugee crisis was a part of a strategy of tension. I can't prove that. I don't have the leaked out white paper that says, yeah, we're going to bring in 1 million refugees to revive fascism. But I suspect that's what it was. I suspect that it was a way to revive nationalism in Europe, to spark nationalism in Europe. And this, I believe, is in accordance to the Gladio Doctrine, which was being done during the Cold War, from the, I want to say, early 50s all the way into the early 90s. NATO had a program which was supposed to be a secret called Gladio. And the whole point of Operation Gladio was to revive nationalism. And this is why NATO supported far-right paramilitaries and also neo-Nazis. And going in, and it wasn't just the European far right. There was also Islamists as well that NATO was supporting. NATO supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. So it's not like what I'm saying is completely far-fetched. It has precedent in recent history, really recent history. We're talking decades ago. So when I saw the refugee crisis and how Angela Merkel was just acting so exuberant about it, I mean, that got me really suspicious. Like, why is this happening? Do you think the Germans are that stupid? The Germans aren't stupid people. The Germans have been around for a long time. German people have been around for thousands of years. They crushed the Roman Empire. They did. We talk about, all the Muslims crushed the Roman Empire, 1453. That's true. The eastern half, right? What was left of the Roman Empire in the east. What crushed the Western Roman Empire? It wasn't the Muslims. It wasn't the Muslims. It was the Germans. I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think the Germans knew long ago that they would have to recruit soldiers for their military. America doesn't want to be involved in interventionism. So the Europeans think, okay, we're gonna have to strengthen ourselves. So we need young people. The Germans knew that they would have to strengthen their military. How would they do that? They need young blood to be in the military ranks. And I remember not too long after Germany started bringing in these refugees in, I want to say late 2015, early 2016, the Germans were talking about allowing refugees to join the Bundeswehr, to join the German armed forces. If you're going to strengthen your military, you're going to need a lot of young people to be in the military ranks. Now, the Muslims in Germany are still a minority. There's still more white Germans than they are Turkish or Middle Eastern people. What's the Muslim population in Germany? Let me just check it out real quick. Hold on. Quick Google. 5.5 million. I mean, that's still a minority. There's 60 million people living in Germany. 5.5 million is a lot of people. Don't get me wrong, but it's still a minority nonetheless. So I think the Germans, they want to use these Muslims to be in the military, these young Muslims, and that may actually happen. But the Germans are going to have to really, really appeal to the Muslim population. It's like in Russia, do you know how many Muslims live in Russia? So there's 14 million Muslims living in Russia. That's a lot of people. That's an entire country. Okay, and the Russians have done so far, I mean, they had a war back in the 90s with the Chechens and the Dagestanis, but nonetheless, the Russians have so far been doing a decent job in appealing to their Muslim population. I mean, a lot of Muslims are in the military. A lot of Muslims have been fighting for Russia against the Ukrainians. Albeit, there's also a good amount of Chechen Mujahideen fighting for the Ukrainians against the Russians as well. So I think the Germans, they want to appeal, to the Muslim population to get the military up. But I also think that the refugee crisis has been very helpful in the Muslim crisis has been, or the refugee crisis, I should say, which is mainly a Muslim crisis, has been very helpful in dividing Europe. But it's also stoked up nationalism, and it has caused division in Europe. It has caused division in the European Union to the point where the British left the EU, which was a serious deal. I mean, that Brexit was a very serious matter. So why is that important? Like, why is division significant? Well, division is significant because look at what's been going on in Europe. Look at what's been happening in the European Union. Geert Wilders of the Dutch Freedom Party, or Party of Freedom, however you call it, just dominated the election. Now, I remember hearing about Geert Wilders when I was in high school. I never trusted him. Even when I was in high school, I didn't like him. But I remember hearing about Geert Wilders in high school, when Geert Wilders had 0 seats. He had nothing. Nobody cared about Geert Wilders. Nobody wanted to talk about Geert Wilders unless it was a controversial, unless there was some kind of controversy against him. He was friends with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. He was part of that whole Van Gogh phenomena where there was a movie about wife beating that came from the Netherlands, and the director, some guy whose last name was Van Gogh, was stabbed to death, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali was all over that story, and Geert Wilders was all over that story. But Geert Wilders has been very, very patient. And his patience has paid off because he just dominated the Dutch election. That is crazy. This is amazing, guys. We are living in surreal times. I remember in high school thinking, okay, Geert Wilders, who's this guy? And all the American rightists were talking about him. Who supported Geert Wilders years ago, back in 2017 before that? I don't know about now, but years ago, okay? Almost a half a decade ago, I wrote about Geert Wilders and how he was getting most of his money from where? From the United States. And specifically from whom? From Horowitz. From David Horowitz of the Horowitz Freedom Center. That is where Geert Wilders got a lot of his money, from American Zionists, or I should say a Zionist, but probably multiple, because there's different people who donate money into these sorts of projects. The Horowitz Freedom Center was a major financer for Geert Wilders. Now, isn't that interesting? You have a guy in the Netherlands winning a major election, and back in 2017, he won, I want to say, third or second place in the Dutch election in 2017. Geert Wilders got second place. He took 13% of the vote in 2017. He got 20 seats in the Dutch parliament, and people thought, oh, okay, whatever, blah blah. And then he had some hurdles, in the next years, in the subsequent years, he had hurdles. He went down to third place, maybe a little bit lower, but now he's a number one. And a lot of that money came from American Zionists. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this is a fact. You can look into this. You can look into this. Because after Geert Wilders won his victory in 2017, he won his big advancement in 2017, he made a speech for the Horowitz Center. It was either before the victory or after. I'm pretty certain it was after. But nonetheless, around the time of his victory, he made a speech in the Horowitz Center. He made a speech in the Horowitz Center. Why? Because that's who was paying him. And Geert Wilders is very Eurosceptic. He's a part of that Eurosceptic crowd, with Le Pen and AfD. So in Europe, there has been this group, a political gang of rightists who have been using the Islamic immigration situation to promote their own positions and to gain electoral victories. And this group consists of people like Philip de Winter, Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, AfD, the like. And this group has been around for a long, long time. Europe is dividing. Now, here's the thing about Geert Wilders. Why would Jews support a far-right candidate, right? Because supposedly Geert Wilders is part of the far right, and the far right is compared to Nazis and all that. So why would Zionists support such a person? Why? Why would Jews support AfD? You have Jewish people who vote for AfD in Germany, which is a far-right party, which the AfD I think is worse than Geert Wilders, from what I can tell. AfD is like they're Nazis. Okay, let's be real here. They're Nazis in disguise, and sometimes they reveal their own faces. Sometimes they pull off the masks, as was the case with Bjorn Höcke back in, I want to say, 2019. Bjorn Höcke talked about how some Holocaust memorial was a memorial of shame, and he was just tired of seeing the Holocaust memorials. Wir brauchen nichts anderes als eine erinnerungspolitische Wende 180 Grad. And he talked about how the Messiah of Germany lives in a cave in a mountain somewhere.
In der Höhle des Kyffhäuser Berges schläft ein Kaiser, eines Tages mit seinen Getreuen zu erwachen und wenn die Not am größten ist, des Reiches Herrlichkeit wiederherzustellen. Wir haben jetzt 70 Jahre lang Mahnmale gebaut. Es ist hohe Zeit, dass wir endlich wieder Denkmäler errichten.
I mean, something that is akin to 12th Imamism in Iran. Like the 12th, in Iran they say that the 12th Imam is living in a cave somewhere. So they expose themselves. Now, is Geert Wilders a Nazi? Like, is he reading Mein Kampf and all that in secret? There's no evidence of that, right? There hasn't really been any like serious evidence that Geert Wilders is a Nazi. Now, Geert Wilders can be a racist, yes. He has said some things about Moroccans. But so far from what I have seen, Geert Wilders he's really just focused on anti-immigration. I think years ago he supported euthanasia. He definitely supports Sodom. I don't like the guy. I think the guy's a sicko. But why would Zionists support this guy? And I think that in America, you have people who are very wealthy, who are Zionists, and they notice the rise of Islam. They don't like that. So they say, well, let's promote the far right. And so they will fund people like Geert Wilders. And then you could say, well, maybe this guy's a Nazi. And they'll say, well, he's not a Nazi. He's just a right-wing guy who hates Islamic immigration. So they feel that they can facilitate an anti-Islamic movement and control it so that hopefully it doesn't become Nazistic, right? That's a possibility as to what is happening. So Geert Wilders, yes, he's far right. Yes, he's potentially dangerous, but it looks like he is controllable. Now, there is another group in the Netherlands that I think we should be worried about, and that is the Forum for Democracy Party. Now, I remember I wrote a whole article about the Forum for Democracy Party back in 2019 when the Forum for Democracy Party dominated the regional elections in the Netherlands. The Forum for Democracy Party got the majority of the seats in the 2019 election in the Netherlands. Now, think about this. 2017, Geert Wilders won second place in the Dutch general election. In that same year, and in that same election, Forum for Democracy Party got one seat in the Dutch parliament. You could say, well, that one seat, that's laughable. Forum for Democracy Party was a party that had literally just popped up, it's seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, nothing comes out of nowhere, but you get what I mean. They were a fresh party, brand new. And in their first election, in their first general election, they won one seat. Now, it takes a lot of votes to win one seat in a European parliamentary election. Just look at Turkey, for example. In Turkey, you have a far-right nationalist party that has made a coalition with Erdogan. I forget their name, but they won 5 seats, this far-right party in Turkey. They won 5 seats. And they are very, very nationalistic, very racist, and they won 5 seats. You could say, well, 5 seats, that's nothing. But it took 1 million votes to get those 5 seats. So you have 1 million people voting for this party. That means, if you have 1 million people voting for a party, that means that popularity can increase. If I have 1 million people watching my YouTube channel, that means that I can get way more followers, right? And even if you have 100,000 votes, that means you can increase. That means there's a huge chance or a huge hope that you can increase. So I remember, so the fact that you have Geert Wilders winning first place, the fact that in 2019 you had this far-right party called the Forum for Democracy Party, which is much more radical than Geert Wilders, winning a major election in the Netherlands. This is a sign, everybody. This is a sign. And now, in Sweden, the second biggest party in Sweden is the Sweden Democrats. Literally a party founded by the SS. A party founded by the SS. So what's happening is you're getting these right-wing victories. Some of these rightists are not as bad as others. Some of these rightists are more moderate than others. Some of them are more to the right than others. And what I fear is that it's only going to get worse. I'm not really so worried about Geert Wilders because he's basically he's like a Dutch Trump, right? And he's a blonde. Well, that's actually, his blonde hair is fake, by the way. He's naturally a black-haired man, and he's actually part Indonesian. So he knows that if he actually showed his real hair, he would look more Asian than he already is. He would actually look Asian, and he doesn't want to look Asian. He wants to look white, which is another reason why I don't like this guy. I remember back in, I think it was in 2016, Geert Wilders was in the United States. He came to Florida, and he did a speech with Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer. And they talked about, this was back in 2016. And it was a response to the Orlando shooting. And Geert Wilders did this speech, and behind Geert Wilders was these posters of male youths in sensual poses, and it was all homosexual, erotic photography, and it was just plain creepy. It was very, very creepy stuff. What we're seeing is a major shift in the zeitgeist. The fact that, and man, this is such a fascinating topic. I can talk for hours about this. The fact that when I was in high school, I heard about Geert Wilders, and how at that time when I was in high school, Geert Wilders had no seats. Now he's number one. That's a big shift. The fact that Forum for Democracy Party, which, by the way, is more far-right than Geert Wilders, won big in 2019. After getting one seat in 2017 and then winning big in 2019, that's significant. Forum for Democracy Party is worse than Geert Wilders. Geert Wilders is someone who focuses on immigration. He is somebody that focuses on the problem with Islamic refugees or Islamic immigrants in Europe. He's right about a lot of the things that he says. but he could still be dangerous. Don't get me wrong. Forum for Democracy Party focuses on immigration, but they are openly eugenists. Do you see what I'm saying? So Geert Wilders will say, I don't want these immigrants because they're going to bring crime. Forum for Democracy Party comes and says, we believe in eugenics. Eugenics, they are really just Nazis. I mean, Forum for Democracy Party is a Nazi party. It's a repackaged, remarketed Nazism. And they won big in regional elections in 2019 after winning just one seat in the Dutch parliament in 2017. And the fact that Geert Wilders went from 0 to dominating the election, and the fact that Forum for Democracy Party went from getting one seat in the general election to winning big in regional elections in 2019 tells me that Europe is on the way to becoming far-right nationalist. I think Americans have this misconceived idea, or this they have this misconception about Europeans, that Europeans are just like idiots and the weaklings and Americans are better and all this stuff. I think people in America are in for a rude awakening, because the fact is that in the European Union alone, there's 500 million people. Most of these people are white. And a lot of Europeans don't want to be a minority. A lot of them most of them don't want to be a minority. And so they have this fear that immigration is going to swallow them up. So they're turning to the right. In other words, the whole atmosphere that we have been accustomed to when it comes to the Western world, when it comes to Europe, is going away. And if you look at, for example, Sweden, the second biggest party in Sweden is the Sweden Democrats, which is a far-right party founded by members of the SS. Germany, one of the biggest parties, is AfD. I remember I was in Spain. I talked about this before. I was in Spain in 2015, in the spring of 2015, and I met one of the leaders of the Vox Party, which is now one of the biggest parties in Spain. And I met him at a conference, at a Catholic Christian. Wasn't really. It was mainly it was an evangelical based conference, but there were Catholics that were there nonetheless. The funder of the conference, or the funder of the organization that organized the conference, was a right-wing Catholic, a trad Catholic. And I remember he told me that he was a leader of the Vox Party. And I asked him, how many seats do you have? And he said, we have no seats right now. And I said, but what do you think is going to happen in the future? And he said, you will watch. Vox is going to become a major party here in Spain. And I said, how do you know that? He said, they are millions of people like me living in this country. And this guy was telling me about how he was a tall Spanish guy. And, well, he was really Portuguese, but what's the difference? He was a tall Iberian, let's just put it that way. And he was telling me about how he was training with the Spanish Special Forces for some secret Catholic esoteric paramilitary organization, the name of which he didn't want to tell me, and how he had a priest who was a spiritual father, and the priest was the spiritual father of the organization, of the paramilitary organization. I mean, it sounded like the damn Freemasons. It sounded very creepy. And he told me that this paramilitary organization is preparing for a war in Spain. Now, he didn't say that it was going to be Spaniards versus Spaniards, but he did tell me that that they were preparing for a war with Muslims in Spain. Now, I think in such a case, there would be a civil war between Spaniards, right? It would be lefties versus righties, and then you would have the Muslims siding mainly with the lefties, if I had to make an assumption about that. But he told me this, and I didn't take him that seriously. I mean, I took his organization seriously. I thought that was very interesting. But when he told me that his party was going to dominate, was going to become this major party, I didn't believe him. Because in the United States, I had met people who would tell me, oh, I'm running for president or whatever, and they wouldn't win a damn thing. But in Europe, you see politics is a little bit different. Well, it's a lot different in Europe. In Europe, see, in America, we have Republican versus Democrat. And in both of these parties, you have different factions. There's different factions of the Republican Party, different factions of the Democrat Party. And these factions are kind of like their own little parties unto themselves, but they're all under the umbrella of either Democrat or Republican. So in the Democrat Party, you have you have the center left, you have your progressives, your typical liberals, your neoliberals, and then you have like the far left types. You have your Bernie Sanders, you have your Cortezes, your Tlaibs. You have those types of people. And for example, that far left faction in the Democrat Party is like its own party. It's like its own party, and they can leverage themselves, and they can use their leverage to get things that they want, or to win certain victories for the Democrat Party. But they will differ wildly from other Democrats. And so, for example, you have Democrats. You had a Democrat in West Virginia. I remember. I forgot his name, but this Democrat wasn't on board with everything that their Democrat Party wanted to do, and because he had this major position, because he had West Virginia, he could veto certain things the Democrats wanted to do, and so he had that leverage. So these different factions are like little parties. So if I wanted to start my own little party, I would never, in America, I would never start a party. I would never say, I'm going to start this party. I would make my own movement within the Republican Party, because that would be the only way that I would succeed. I would make my own little movement in the Republican Party. And then I would garner followers towards my side, and I would garner Republicans towards my side. And then I would run as a Republican. And then I would get things that I wanted done. But if I would start my own party, and I would, let's say I'm going to start the, Revive Christendom Party or something like that, I would get nowhere, nothing, zip, nothing, nada. But if I wanted to say start a trad Catholic movement in America, and I wanted to get political victories, albeit small victories, nonetheless still victories, I would just become a Republican, and then I would have Catholics vote for me, and then I would push my agenda under the title of Republican, because that would be the only way that I could win. That's how politics works in the United States. We have a two-party system, but within the two parties, you have splinters and factions and things like that. And America does it this way so that I think it's because it's easier to control these factions. You're under the Republican system, you're under the Democrat system, so you have to abide by a certain narrative to gain support, or to gain the support of the rest of the party, things like that. So it's a way to control these factions in the United States. But in Europe, there is no two-party system. Right, there are no two-party systems in the United States, in Europe. There are no two-party systems in any European country. You have parties that dominate, right? So in Germany, you have like the Christian Democrats, or you have the Greens, et cetera, et cetera. You have these big parties, but that does not mean that one day a party that seems insignificant can one day come and dominate you. So in Europe, they're more open about it. It's not just they don't have like a huge party that everybody has to abide by, and then they have factions within the party. You can have something like Vox in Spain be completely insignificant, doing little conferences in Madrid, doing little Christian conferences in Madrid, talking about how they're going to get a major victory when they have 0 seats, and getting zero not being intimidating to anybody. One day dominate the election, or an election. One day take a significant amount of seats in a parliament. And that's how it is in Europe. So you have the Forum for Democracy Party comes out seemingly out of nowhere, boom, wins one seat in the Dutch in the Dutch Parliament, you think, okay, big deal. But then they went big in the 2019 regional elections. So it's a very very different system. That's what Trump did exactly. Trump has his own faction in the Republican Party, and that faction it has dominated the Republican Party. The neocons are out. The neoconservatives are out. And that's another thing that I want to talk to you guys about. Now, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So what's going on in Europe is nationalism is increasing. And with nationalism, you will have divisions in Europe. Major divisions in Europe. We've already seen it with Brexit. And this division could eventually lead to... This division can come to a point to where the Germans will say, okay, we can't trust these other European countries. We have to make Germany great again. But again, the Netherlands, just use an example, is militarily very well connected with Germany, because the Dutch military has been almost completely, or effectively, completely integrated into the German armed forces. The Dutch Navy, for example, is a part of the German Navy. The Dutch military, the Dutch armed forces, the Dutch army is a part of the German army. They're connected. So what Germany is working on right now is creating a pan-European military force. So, is Geert Wilders going to get rid of that? I don't think so. The way I see it is that you're going to have nationalism in Europe. And it's going to be pan-European. We are Europeans. We are proud Europeans. And that is going to manifest itself eventually into militarism. Let's make a big European military. Now you could say, well, I don't believe that, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you're right, I'm not going to I don't think my predictions are going to be 100% correct. I'm going to get some things wrong. Okay. I'm simply making a rough estimate as to what I think will happen. Remember Viktor Orbin. Viktor Orbin, big Eurosceptic, causes a lot of strife in the EU. But when it comes down to forming a pan-European military force, Viktor Orbin is behind it. Viktor Orbin is behind it. And remember, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Geert Wilders said, bring in the Ukrainian refugees. Geert Wilders supported absorbing Ukrainian refugees. So what that tells me is that, yes, Geert Wilders is this Eurosceptic guy, but the question is, will he say no to a strong European military force? We'll have to see. But I think what all of this reveals, what all of this tells us, is that there is a trend happening in Europe, and that trend is towards nationalism. That trend is towards pan-Europeanism. That trend is towards distrust from the United States, distrust of the United States, and a desire to make Europe strong. And we've seen this with Olaf Scholz. We saw this with Merkel when she said not too long after Brexit that we can really no longer fully trust the Americans. We've seen this with Ursula von der Leyen when she has talked about making more military autonomy for the EU. We've seen some very interesting rhetoric. Jean-Claude Juncker, who is the former commissioner for the EU. I remember Juncker, he made a speech, I believe in Belgium, and he said that Europe basically must eclipse America. And what that meant was that Europe needs to become very powerful to the point where we can become like America. Because let's face it, Germany has been occupied and is still occupied by the United States. And if you talk to far-right people in Germany, they will tell you Germany is occupied. It's an occupied country. And it is. And you have tens of thousands of American soldiers in Germany. I mean, it's an occupation. Now, why are the soldiers there? They're there supposedly to defend Europe in case of a Russian invasion, blah, blah, blah. But let's remember what the purpose of NATO is. The purpose of NATO, as it was said when NATO was founded, is to keep the Germans weak and to keep the Russians out. And that's why America, for so many decades, has been in charge of the defense of Germany. They want to defend Germany because I think the Americans had an understanding, given the fact with World War II and all that, that if you allow Germany to be unleashed, you could have another Reich. But we have come to a different point in history. We have come to a different point in our history.